Okay, so in order to get started with developing a game, you want to start off with establishing a solid premise. If you're not sure what I mean by premise, I will recap it briefly, but I went over the different phases of the development lifecycle, and the first phase is to establish a strong premise. If you want to know a little bit more about the agile development approach and the software development lifecycle, check out my previous video where I talk about the different phases as well as the different game roles. This video is specifically about that first phase where you take your idea for a game and you then turn it into something tangible. So, what is a premise? We're also going to discuss project context, where to begin. We're going to talk about the plot, where there's the fun, the definition of done, specifications, and finish off with an elevator pitch. So, defining a premise, it can be called a problem or a goal. It is a clear definition of what it is you're trying to do. You can also call it a single point of reference for your team. That is to say that it serves as a guideline for your developers, your whether those are your programmers, your artists, marketers, testers. They're all going to refer back to the premise and have a clear understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve with this project and whether or not you're on track. As a game designer, your job is to both establish the premise as well as to communicate it and ensure that all other members of your team are adhering to that theme. So one of the main things you're going to avoid if you have a good premise is things like scope creep and basically like flip-flopping, which is where you make a decision, then you make a contradicting decision, and then you make another contradicting decision later on in development because you basically are not keeping track of the things that you're trying to achieve very clearly, and you just keep going back and forth on yourself. Making decisions in the heat of the moment instead of having clear guidelines. So keep in mind that this is going to be an accumulation of your vision. So it's about core game mechanics, plot overview, specifications, visual style, and anything else that you need to communicate with the team in regards to your overall project. So first, I just talk about contextualizing your project. This is because not everyone is doing the same thing. You might be working on a piece of a larger project. I've got an example here from Silent Symphony where I had to build the mini game, the music playing mini game, where you're just playing you're hitting the notes as they come across in a kind of like Guitar Hero rhythm game fashion. Whereas the full game has numerous features and elements. So when I did the remake, as you've seen on my previous videos, you'll see that I built the entire thing from the ground up. Every feature, everything had to be incorporated from premise to release. So if you're working on a smaller piece of a larger project, you change the way you approach this compared to when you're working on the project in its entirety. Another thing to consider is if this is a personal or educational project, then your priorities will be shifted from if it is a professional or commercial project. With personal projects, you might focus on making sure you hit every learning objective, making sure that you follow certain practices. You can test out different things. We can also take shortcuts where necessary because your priority is to get it to work. And you want to test out features that might not be the best feature or the quickest feature, but they're the one that you want to learn in for that scenario. With professional, you need to focus a lot more on the layout, the visuals, solid code. You can't afford to have data leaks or unmaintainable code, and various other things to consider. So your priorities shift as well as your main goals and objectives. Where to begin? So it all starts with inspiration. Once you identify that, you should have one of the following: a game or experience you wish to replicate. Let's say, for example, I was playing Fable and I was like, oh, you know what? I wish I could play Fable, but as like multiplayer. That's your inspiration. You have this idea, an idea for a story. So you could be like with my Halo Fantasy story. We have this like post-apocalyptic world, and I'm like, okay, so I already have the characters and I already have the environment. Now I just need to gamify it. I might have a very specific character in mind. A lot of the time, people do. Um, Basically, the original Mary Sue was somebody created a character that they used to insert themselves as essentially fan fiction into another genre. Or you might have a character where you're like, oh, what if I had a character who could like walk on water or something? You have this character, you have the personality in mind, and you want to build a game and a world around them. Um, that was similar to the next point, which is if you have a mechanic. So, like for example, in Starlight, you can walk on shadows. A lot of our early concepts were built around mechanics. So, Silent Symphony was built around the mechanic of you see light, you see sound as colors. Starlight was the idea that you're afraid of the dark and you're using a star in order to interact with the world. Sorry, to interact with the world. Um, and you might have any of these are valid, but it's up to it's just about identifying which it is that's got you started. Why do you want to make a game? What is it that triggered this interest? For a lot of people, it is going to be either the first one, a game experience you want to replicate, or a specific mechanic you have in mind. But for some people, it's a story. Um, on a business level, sometimes it is the audience. So, for example, at AAA studios, or if you have like businessmen or investors, shareholders in a company, they say, "Hey, you know what? Right now, this audience, this group of people are spending a lot of money on products. We want to impress them. We want to sell a game to them." Or if you work in, say, education, you're saying, "I want to make an educational game that is geared towards students between 14 and 16." So you have an audience first, and then you're reverse engineering what that audience likes. And then sometimes you just have a theme or a prerequisite that's given to you. So if you're working in a studio, or if you're doing like a game jam, someone else has already dictated what it is that they want. A game where, for example, it's based around the idea of building or based around the idea of mergers. And you have to come up with a concept that facilitates that theme. So once you have an idea of where it is that you're starting, then there's different strategies for you to then progress. I'm not going to go through all of these, so I'm going to focus on if you already have a mechanic. Sorry about that. If you already have a mechanic in mind, then the next step I believe would be to build a story around that. So my usual tip is pick a place in the world along with a timeline. It literally doesn't matter, it's whatever your personal preference is. But if you say were to pick Victorian London, you would then research the natural threats and sources of conflict within the area. So natural threats might be things like pollution, it might be crime rates, it might be, I don't know, Jack the Ripper. Sources of conflict might be congestion, not enough space, not enough housing, not enough food or class disputes. You also want to pick a benefit to living here. So people would be there for a reason. So it might be easy access to work, easy access to water, social interaction. So these are the different elements that you take into consideration and you say, this is what makes this world. So once you have that established, you can think about how the natural threats can be used as game threats, obstacles within your game. And you can think about the benefits to living there as the goals and the objectives. So if you're saying a benefit to being in this place is easy access to work, your role within the game or your goal in this game is to do your job. Your job might be make deliveries. I saw a game recently which had that theme, which is make deliveries in a hostile environment. The hostility can be anything from, as we discussed, threats. There might be a serial killer on the loose and you have to, keep away from them. Or it might be if you're outside for too long a period of time, you get suffocated from smoking inhalation. I believe that's one of the reasons why London was called the Big Smoke, is because there was just so much pollution and so many factories were coming up during the industrial age. So it's things like that. You take the aspects of that world, of the environment that you've chosen, and you find what it is that is a natural threat and what it is that is a natural benefit, and you turn those into your goals, you turn those into your obstacles. Then you want to use a mechanic that allows you to overcome these threats. So you might pick a skill that the player has. It might be puzzle solving. It might be a special ability. So for example, in Silent Symphony, you can see sound as colors. So that is a skill that gives you clues. So when you interact with people, you can actually, when they talk, they release a color. That color is a clue to their personality and their emotions. So if someone is releasing a hostile color, they're more likely to be a threat. If someone releases, say, a color like yellow, maybe they're just afraid. In Starlight, we actually use the idea that Timothy is so afraid of the darkness that he makes it tangible. He can interact with it. So while he can't go into the darkness without panicking, he can do things like walking on shadows. He can be trapped in cages made of darkness as well. So there's different ways that we can play with that mechanic and make it a part of the world that we've implemented. So moving on from there. So a different starting point might be you already have an idea for a story, and now you want to develop a world around it. So you want to develop your environment. You want to, like I said, it's similar to what I said before. Determine the natural sources of conflict and potential solutions. What in this world that you've created is going to naturally cause conflict? Usually, the main sources of conflict are not enough space, not enough food, and I think I mentioned it in the previous slide. Not enough water, which is related, and a lack of social freedom. So sometimes no freedom of movement. You can't interact with people that you want. You can't. There's like a class divide. Those kind of things. You don't have to include all of these, but you can pick one of those, or you can come up with something entirely different, and that can become your natural source of conflict that you can then evolve into obstacles. From that point, you can invent a character who would thrive or struggle in this world. So this is the part that a lot of people don't always think about. I think a lot of people often come up with a character first, but if you have the world first, you can reverse engineer your characters. Stories are all about conflict. So you either have a character who has survived this world because of traits that they have. So if you've got a world where the natural conflict is classism, then they might thrive because they are of a high class. But if you want to say that they're not thriving but they're struggling, so if you want to go for the underdog approach, you'd say the opposite. They're a low class, or they might be a transient. So like they're traveling through, they don't have any status, or people don't know their status, therefore they might assume that you're a low class. If the natural source of conflict is a lack of food, your character might thrive because they're a hunter, or they might struggle because they have no means of acquiring food themselves. Maybe they're a builder or artisan, so they have to use their trade as a means to earn food from other people. So you've got a skill that you have, for example, you can craft objects. You have something that you need, which is food, and the only way to get that is to craft objects and trade with other people to get food from them. So you can see how once you establish what your environment is, you can reverse engineer a character based on what it is that you want. You can do the same with personality traits. If a character is overly stubborn, then that might be a reason why they're struggling in this environment, which requires you to be flexible and reasonable. If a character is too naive or too open-minded, maybe they're struggling in an environment where people are hostile and people are very deceptive, and they'll take advantage of you. However you want to do it, once you have your world, you can reverse engineer a character to either thrive or struggle in it, and that is the beginnings of your story. You want to establish a beginning, middle, and end. So you want to be able to tell us what is the world like at the start of your story? What is it right now? During the bulk of your story, you want to tell us what the world was like before and why it has become the way it has. It might have always been this way, but typically you go through you start at the beginning, and then you go to the past, and you justify why the beginning is the way that it is. And then towards the end of the story, you conclude what has the world become? What has your actions throughout this story, or what have your experience, how does that change the world, and what does it change it into? Does it remain the same? Does it become more hostile? Does it become a more pleasant place? Does it do something abstract where it doesn't change, it stays in a similar state even if all the pieces have been moved? There's lots of ways of playing with that, but the idea of basic storytelling is you do want to have that clear beginning, middle, and end, present, past, future. That's the order in which you discuss them. I can go into a lot more detail when it comes to plot narrative design, but this is just the basic starting point. The next way of looking at this, and is the last one I'm going to do, is if you have a character in mind, you can then develop your world around the character. So you want to establish what are your character's traits. So for example, we've got Noah here. Is that Noah? No, that's Ira. Ira from United They Stand. His traits is he's actually a foreigner who was brought originally. His father was a bodyguard to a trader, and the trader basically not sold him, not so much as a slave, and more as a servant, saying, as a trade, I'll let you keep my bodyguard in exchange for whatever goods, as a token of good faith. Because he saved the life of a local lord, and then the trader said, "You can keep my bodyguard, and he will protect you from your enemies." Ira is the son of that guard, meaning he's essentially a foreigner, but he was born and raised in this land, so he's not a foreigner; he's a native. So his traits are essentially he has a bit of an identity crisis. He visually stands out. He has like darker skin, taller stature, different facial features. Even though things like his accent and other aspects of his personality fit in, he still wears the traditional gear and armor of the locals, but some of it is inspired by his father, and some of it is inspired by his heritage. So we use those traits to develop a character, and then we reverse engineered conflict from a world, we can reverse engineer conflict from the character. He stands out, so that means we can say people bully him, people ostracize him, it's hard for him to get resources, it's hard for him to climb the social ladder. Or we can do the opposite and say, because of his differences, he stands out and people kind of praise him, they look up to him, they kind of idolize him as something exotic. And both has happened in history before. We can look at characters like, let's say, because I'll do one I haven't done yet, the driver from Battle Drive. He was a first responder, he was an ambulance driver, but there was a catastrophe. He basically, during the catastrophe, he prioritized the safety of his passenger, the person who was in his ambulance, over the safety of people who were essentially outside of the vehicle on the streets. The idea was that there was a massive earthquake, and he chose to risk driving through the earthquake despite his orders to stay put, because he knew that his passenger would die if they didn't get medical attention. Due to that decision, he ends up getting fired, and he becomes a a stunt driver instead, and his life essentially just gets steadily more difficult moving on. How do you develop a conflict in this world based on his personality traits? Like I was saying, he becomes a stunt driver. What happens is he gets seen by civilians who recognize him from the papers. He loses his job. He ends up getting taking on more and more dangerous work. He starts doing jobs in more dangerous locations. He struggles to advance through the story. He ends up driving through war zones. He ends up even becoming a criminal at one point, until the game reaches its climax. And the story has essentially been crafted around this idea that he is a guy that's just had a series of unfortunate events, a lot of bad luck, making his life more difficult. And many aspects of Battle Drive the story that we're telling has evolved from that character design. We already had an idea for a mechanic, and we had an idea for a world. We then invented a character, and we realized that this character would go through certain trials. So those trials allowed us to create entirely new levels and entirely new plot points, because we were building the world around the character. So you can do it both ways. So like I was saying, if that character has strengths, do those strengths translate into game mechanics? So the driver, in this case, the best example would be Tago from Silent Symphony. His ability to see sound as color is a game mechanic. So every time there is a sound in the game, it releases a color. If is casting magic, every magic has a unique color that is an indication to what that magic will do. Enemies will release different colors, which is an indication to their strengths and their weaknesses. If the character has a weakness, does that translate into an obstacle? So, for example, with Timothy, he's afraid of the dark. That's his weakness. So the obstacle is darkness in the game. We add areas where there is only darkness, and then you have to figure out a way to get through it. Sometimes you can think about your environment and what kind of environment would birth such a character. So again, let's go back to the driver from Battle Drive. What makes him who he is, and what makes his story so hostile, is he's in a world which is becoming more and more hostile because there is the enroaching disaster that is on its way. The world is ending, but it's ending slowly. The general public are not aware of this. There is increased I would call it despair or tension because of bad weather patterns, outbreaks of violence and war, um, earthquakes and other natural disasters. And one of the reasons why he had it so hard is because he was essentially used as a scapegoat, as a distraction by the media to keep people talking about something other than the rising uh, hostility in their environment. So it's that aspect of the world that made him who he is, that makes him go from being a first responder, being an ambulance driver, to being a thief. He's being shaped by the world around him. And I can shape the world around him in reverse by saying I already know where he ends up, because we originally had the character designed as um, the end result, so to speak, which is he's not a criminal, more of an outlaw, or an anti-hero even, where he's just out for himself and trying to survive. You're saying, why is he out for himself and trying to survive? Well, because he actually was a really good person, and the world just kept dumping on him. So the part I'm telling you is the part where we reverse engineered it. We started with a character who was very jaded, and then we said, what in the world would make him this jaded? And we added all of these elements of he was a first responder, he lost his job, he was a stunt driver, he lost his job, he was a rescue driver, he lost his job, he was what's it called? He drove through war zones, gets betrayed, and then ends up living on his own, struggling to get by. He can't get any jobs driving anymore, so he becomes a criminal. He just does basic getaway driver type jobs until eventually he gets a cool new vehicle and does like street racing, and then the apocalypse kicks off, and that's where he is at the start of the apocalypse. Things to consider: who are they at the start of the story? So I already kind of went through that process just now. What do they want to achieve? For the driver, he just wants to survive, but he actually wants to drive. He doesn't just want to get a job like as a bank teller, or he doesn't want to get a job in retail. He wants to be a driver, so he's looking for jobs that allow him to experience the thrill of high-speed driving. So that's why he keeps taking more and more dangerous jobs, not because it's the only job available, but it's the only jobs that allow him to do what he wants to do. Reveal their past to show why, so as I just kind of went through that process. And who do they ultimately become by the end of the story? So like I said, I started with the character at the end and reversed engineered him to the beginning. Then we tell that story from the beginning up until the end. You as the player now get to choose the objectives and your enemies and your play style based on the fact that this is a character who has no allegiances. He has a good heart, but he's also very jaded, and he'll basically do whatever it takes to survive. So you as a player can choose anything, and it will still coincide with the character's personality. So it works well for a game that is about freedom and decision making. I added this to this part of my discussion, and I realized that it's really easy to get carried away talking about plot development. I do have a separate stream and a separate like list of slides to talk about plot development. I just wanted to cover some of the essential elements. So to kind of recap, I'll just kind of go back again. So if you're looking to make your own game from the beginning, then what I would recommend is find your inspiration and understand your starting point. If your starting point is you have a mechanic in mind and you want to make a game out of it, then build your environment and then build your characters. If you have an environment, then build your characters and then build your mechanics. And then if you have a character, build the environment and then build the mechanics. That's kind of basically, those are the three things you want to have when you're ready to continue. The other elements you can build up later, but once you have a clear environment, clear character to play as, and clear game mechanics, everything else can kind of come in afterwards. But if you don't have those things, you're going to struggle to develop it. Because when you're building your plot, essentially these are the key things that you need. You need a setting or environment, as I just mentioned. You need to know who is the player playing as, so who's your protagonist. What are they trying to achieve? Why are they trying to achieve it? And what are they avoiding? Remember, an antagonist does not have to be a person. So like in Battle Drive, the antagonist is the environment itself. It is the natural disasters that are constantly taking place as you're trying to complete the game. And then there's going to have, so if the antagonist is a person, do they have a motive? Is it revenge? Are they just evil, etc., etc.? Keep in mind that all stories basically have a beginning, middle, and end, but it does get a little bit more advanced the more you understand storytelling. For example, the twist is to subvert expectations, and there is a lot of nuance to get that right. But when you are going through the beginning, middle, and end, you want to address the past, present, and future, but not in that order. It's more to, so the beginning is your present, the middle is your past, the end is the future. So that's the order in which you want to establish your story. And then the twist is essentially a defining moment. It is a moment in the story where everything that the player thought was happening, it kind of flips on its head. It can either be your challenge, your obstacle becomes more difficult. The enemy is in fact somebody else entirely. A relationship that is established is broken, such as an ally becomes an enemy or dies at some point. It's things that suddenly shift the flow of the story so that it essentially just becomes a little bit less predictable. But the main thing I want to mention, if you're going to add a twist, never lie to your audience. Some films get away with it, but it's generally bad practice. There's a difference between deceiving and lying. If I say this character can walk through walls, and then later in the story he gets trapped inside a cage and he can't get out, and I'm like, oh, he can't walk through walls, that was a lie, then I've just lied to you, and it creates a stupid kind of undesirable effect at that point in the story, where I'm going to have to create some kind of plot device to solve the scenario. Whereas if it's more like a character's wearing a mask and they have maybe like they have a hood up, and let's say the hood gets pulled off and they have blonde hair, and you're like, oh crap, there's another character with blonde hair, it must be that character. And later on you find out that the blonde hair was actually a wig. It was a double kind of trick. They purposely revealed the blonde hair to mislead you, but we never said their hair was blonde. We never said this character was that character. We just hint at it so strongly that you made that assumption. That is that misdirection. That's that deception. That's acceptable. You can deceive your audience, just don't outright lie to them. I see it in a lot of stories, and it's bad practice, basically. When establishing a premise, you need to understand, why do people play video games? There are a lot of reasons, and they can be, they can kind of go back and forth for different things, but I've listed some of the main ones, just to kind of keep it simple, because if we went through every single possibility, we could be here for hours. But generally speaking, humans have relied on games longer than written word. Something to keep in mind is animals play games. Like ancient human civilizations, they had games. Video games is just a new take on an old concept. Because of video games, we can do more with them now than we've ever been able to do in the past. But why we play games hasn't really changed. It's just the video part that is added to it. So keep in mind that games can be a social activity. It's just a means for people to kind of coordinate and get together. They're a powerful tool for learning and practicing skills. So originally, a lot of the reason people play games is to practice or rehearse skills in essentially a low stakes environment. If you lose in a game, you don't lose in real life. Whereas if you were to do, say, I don't know, the most classic example is war games. In a war game, you lose the game, that's it. Whereas in war, if you lose, you die, or your entire nation could be destroyed. So you have war games so that you practice strategy, fighting, combat, tactics in an environment where you can afford to lose. When we use games for learning and when we use games for practicing, we get those skills at a much higher, more accelerated rate than if we were to just read or if we were to just do, which is why gamification is such a powerful subject. Like any media, games are a great way to relax and just avoid stress. If done poorly, they can increase stress, and sometimes games will use what is referred to as tension and relief. They will create a stressful environment so that you get the relief when they basically give that to you. It can be a dangerous approach to making a game enjoyable, because if you fail with the relief part, it just creates stress, and you can sometimes create a scenario where it's more, the game becomes addictive because you become addicted to the release as opposed to enjoying the game. The way you know if this is done poorly is a good game should have somebody finish playing and want to play again. A bad game you play the game and you don't want to play again. You have a negative experience. You feel bad about the game, but you will play it anyway. Not because you enjoy it, but because you have an addiction to a sensation the game is providing. That can be really unhealthy and is kind of an unethical game design principle. Some mobile games follow exactly that. They create stress or they create constant dopamine rushes to make a game addictive, but the person who's playing it is aware that this game is bad for them. They feel guilt or stress from playing the game, but while they're in the game, they're enjoying it. As soon as they stop, they're like, oh, I should not have picked that up. And then at some point, they can slip up and they start playing it again. That's a pattern. It does work from if you're just trying to like sell your game and make it fun, but it can create a lot of negative side effects, and it can be considered unethical as a design principle. Games are also a powerful tool for storytelling and entertainment. So whether it's stories can be told through word of mouth, they can be told through motion, they can be told through music, not to mention obviously video or script. Games combine all of that into one. Some games literally have all of that in one. Others will use multiple elements. Because a game is interactive, a person's engagement in the story is that much stronger, so they are far more connected to the story through it. That is why games typically are the most powerful medium for telling stories. If you have a story you really want to tell, a game might be the best way to tell it. Of course, it requires more engagement from the viewer, which is why sometimes movies are better because people can relax and they just absorb it. It just kind of hits them. But if you're trying to really get a story that somebody's going to remember for a lifetime, gamify it, basically. But most importantly, games are just supposed to be fun. At the end of the day, you're meant to be able to enjoy it. And by that, I usually just say a game should elicit a positive emotion. This can be anything from like amusing, entertaining, enjoyable. Ultimately, the positive reaction can vary, and I'm not going to try and go through all of them, but here's some key ones to keep in mind whenever you're designing a game. You need to know what emotion your game is supposed to invoke. If your game is supposed to invoke pride by having the player overcome difficult challenges, that can be intellectual challenges, or it can just be really difficult gameplay mechanics, or it can be bosses that are really hard to defeat. You can invoke a sense of euphoria through sensory stimulation with attractive images or sounds. So games that are like rhythm games that have really fun music or have really colorful, bright visuals are a great way to just stimulate and create a positive reaction in your players. I mentioned earlier there's the dopamine effect, where essentially you just bombard the player with rewards and accomplishments. Now, any game can add rewards and accomplishments. Any game can take advantage of dopamine as a means to make the game fun. The difference is, if your entire game is built on that concept, then that's really unhealthy. And again, a lot of mobile games do exactly that. They just basically just have a lot of flashing lights. They have a lot of like confetti and fireworks and woohoo sounds and stuff like that, and it can just be quite bad. Whereas any normal game typically will have some reward system, some point system, some accomplishment system. It's not bad to have it. It's bad if it's the only thing you have. One thing that people do enjoy is freedom. So freedom through like customization, like character design, or dynamic storytelling, like games that have multiple endings. And also freedom of play styles. I think I would say MMOs, for example, usually combine different play styles. So you can have like the healer, the tank, the DPS, and you can play to your play style with your friends who have different things that they enjoy. This is the opposite of, say, shooter games where everyone is a shooter, or fighting games where everyone is a fighter. In things like MMOs, each person can have their own style and they're still playing together. They're still getting that social element, which I mentioned earlier. They can still have things like challenges, but the challenges can be different depending on your play style. So that sense of freedom and control is really appealing to a lot of people. There's also, it kind of plays on the idea of tension and release, but there's also things like stories that are scary, exciting, funny. So it's not so much the gameplay that is fun, but it is the story that you're telling that can be entertaining and therefore elicit an emotional response. And then finally, I'll just mention dispersing boredom is a massive reason for playing games. So typically you want to make something intellectually stimulating and engaging, something that causes the person to rely on their cognitive functions. So not just, tapping buttons and just swiping left and right, but actually stopping and thinking about what they're doing. So strategy games, resource management games, survival games, stuff like that. Games that have consequences, games that have cause and effect are really powerful for stimulating just the mind in general. Um, as you can guess, some of these things will overlap. So a game that is intellectually stimulating might also invoke pride, or a game that relies on freedom might also use a lot of sensory stimulation. You're not limited to one of these things, and you don't have to tick all of these things. But when you're designing a game, especially when you're just coming up with your initial premise, you need to understand which of these things you are going to focus on. Ideally, pick 1 or 2, 3. So you can pick 3, or you can just focus on one. I would say you should be able to hit at least 3, because things like dopamine rush, you should always be able to tick that off in any game that you're designing. Whereas things like making it engaging and mentally stimulating, I think is something that every game should strive towards. And generally speaking, I think invoking a sense of pride is generally a good approach, but not everyone can do that. Some people like to relax when they're playing games, so it's not the pride part, it's the release part that they want. It's the unwinding. So keep in mind that your audience might like different things. So understand your audience to understand the different types of fun that they would appreciate. Which I guess that leaves one more that I forgot to mention, which is games can be a form of escapism. So, and this, well, basically it's what I was just mentioning, wasn't it? In terms of like cozy games. So they can be a form of escapism from the difficulties and stress of the real world, helping you manage your problems and negative emotions. So rather than saying I'm trying to invoke a positive emotion, it might be I'm trying to disperse or avoid a negative one. Again, done poorly can sometimes become addictive and can be unhealthy, but that's more to do with the player now that needs to manage that. But generally speaking, when it comes to escapism, there are rules to make sure a game captures a person's attention and maintains it so that they can enjoy it and just get away from the real world for a while. So we talk about the keys to good user experience. As a designer, your main objective is to ensure a good user experience for the player. For this, you want to make sure your game is engaging. You want to make sure, well, I want to say like good ideas are important, but understanding what makes for good user experience goes beyond that. You must understand the journey that your user takes and tailor your future decisions around its concepts. There are a few things that I would like to address, but I'm not going to go over all of these in detail. Some of these things we're going to address more later. For example, AIDA, or AIDA, attention, interest, desire, and action, is a concept of understanding how you get the attention of your player, which is the starting point. How quickly do you convert the attention of your player to interest, then get that interest and invoke a desire, and then ultimately convince the player to take an action. So, for example, the attention side might just be a really nice cover, really nice looking game, some good gameplay reviews, and then someone looks at this and says, "Hey, I want to take a look at that. I want more information." That's where interest comes in. You let the person know this is a game they would want to play. So if you have got the attention of somebody who likes strategy games, you should show them the strategy elements of your game. But if you have a fighting game and you've got the attention of someone who likes strategy games, then you've got a mismatch. Your marketing and your attention strategies do not align with the product you've created. So you need to understand, how do you get the attention of the right audience, and then how do you give them information so that they quickly understand this is something that I want to do. The desire part is invoking an emotional response. It's contextualizing this. So saying, okay, you like strategy games, this is a strategy game. But also, maybe there's story, maybe it's competitive, maybe there's multiplayer elements. These are the things that invoke desire. So now that the person knows that this game is relevant to them, why is it better than any other game that they might have looked at before? And if you successfully invoke desire, you then have a call to action to say, play the game, essentially. But this is just the beginning, the start. This is getting their attention and turning that attention into action, playing the game. The difficult part is in the middle. Once you have their engagement, how do you keep it? You need the right amount of challenge and mental stimulation for your audience. If you understand your audience, so that if the game is too challenging or too difficult, that might cause them to disengage. Like we said earlier, if somebody just wants a fun game or a relaxing game, don't try and give them Dark Souls. On the flip side, if somebody is looking for a challenge, they need something that's really going to push them, then don't give them Candy Crush Saga. Like, it's understand your audience and what level of engagement and level of stimulation they need. Even then, there are several things to take in mind, and I think here is a more of a matter of things to avoid, and these are really important areas where you need to make sure that you don't do this when you're trying to maintain the immersion in your game. Bad user interface. If the game is difficult to play, not because it's a difficult game, but because literally it is difficult to play, bad controls, if you're a driving game and the car doesn't steer properly, if it's a dancing game and it doesn't read your movements properly, even something as simple as I was playing a game and it didn't have a pause function. Not because they wanted to make it difficult, but because they just forgot to add a pause function. And I found that really frustrating, that I couldn't pause, I couldn't quit, I couldn't restart. If I pressed the wrong button and started a level and I didn't want to play, I could either wait 3 minutes for it to finish on its own, or I could turn off my Xbox and turn it back on, which was quicker. So the fact that they didn't have the ability to go backwards was so frustrating. I took the game back. I was like, this from a design perspective is ridiculous. So stuff like that is immediately going to be a turn off for people. Even if the game is good, if the interface is bad, they will immediately just want to get away from it. Keep in mind, irritating controls and visual feedback is important. Giving visual feedback is important, but too much feedback can be downside. If you have like too much text on the screen, if you have lots of flashing lights, if it's too congested, and if you can't see what's in front of you because there's like a pop-up that comes up on the side. Most of us have played a game where that happens. They're throwing information at you non-stop because, especially with complicated games, sometimes with MMOs and stuff like that where a lot is happening. Too much information is coming to the screen and it's a distraction. The player gets annoyed by it all. So you need to make sure that only the information they need is visible, and you keep it outside of what I call your primary real estate. For example, for a lot of shooting games, you're looking up, so you want to keep the upside as clear as possible. So that's why a lot of your health, armor, ammo stats are at the bottom of the screen. Whereas with platform games, most of what's happening is at the bottom of the screen. So things like your health, lives, and points are at the top. They flip it because where you're looking when you're playing the game is different, and they want to keep the main play area as clear as possible. So keep that in mind with the type of game that you're working on. Something called drop-off points, or marketing, they call it moments of truth. Basically, it's forced any time in which your player is disconnected from their gameplay, they might choose to stop playing the game. So a good example of this would be forced cutscenes, especially cutscenes that trigger on their own and cutscenes that you can't skip. Game over screens. Some games didn't have game over screens, they just automatically went straight to your last checkpoint, or they minimized the process to your last checkpoint, or they would skip cutscenes if you died. Some games you couldn't even die. Like, what was it? Sands of Time? Not Sands of Time, but one of the Prince of Persia games. If you died, this like your little assistant would just pick you up and just drop you back off at the last checkpoint. If there was a game over screen, the player might stop playing. So they just skip that and just made you go straight back to the checkpoint. That removes the drop-off point and it keeps the player engaged. Is it for the best for the game? Some people argue it isn't, but that's for different reasons. The more you break gameplay, the more likely the player will stop playing. However, controlled breaks is a good thing. If a game doesn't have any controlled breaks, players might feel intimidated in regards to picking the game up. I and many of my friends, especially basically people in their 30s, will have experience with things like Skyrim and things like Oblivion and say, I love this game, but if I start playing it, I'm going to be on it for like 7 hours straight. The game doesn't have any natural breaks, or it has very few natural breaks. So you end up just going on and on and on and on and on. And you know this before you even start playing it. And if you don't have time, you're like, I don't even want to pick it up. I have 2 hours. I could jump on League of Legends, which is like 40 minutes, or I could jump on Call of Duty, like 10, 15-minute matches. I can't jump on Oblivion because it doesn't have fixed windows of gameplay, and I might just lose track of time and just play it indefinitely. So having controlled breaks in a game can be a good thing because it might encourage the player to come back when they stop playing, as opposed to never stop playing at all. If you're confident that your game is good and it is enjoyable, then you can do exactly that. You can have these natural breaks because you know the player will come back every time. Um, Bad logic is a big immersion breaker. A lot of people misunderstand this. Again, something doesn't have to be real to make sense. So Deus Ex Machina is a serious issue with game development or story development in general. So to give an example, if you're watching, say, the Superman movie, and Superman is flying through a mountain and, like blows it apart and then throws a rock into the air and it shoots off into space, and then, I don't know, gets hit by a pigeon and gets knocked out. You're going to say that's dumb. How did he fly through a mountain and is fine? How has he got the strength to throw rocks into space, but a pigeon can knock him out? That doesn't make sense. And people might say, it's a movie about a guy that can fly in the air and run through and fly through mountains. It doesn't need to make sense. No, it doesn't need to be real. Being real is not the same as making sense. Logic is not about saying this is real. It's about saying that there are a set of rules that have been established and you're following those rules. You can make up any rules you want, but once they're established, follow them. Be consistent. It's about cause and effect. And if you don't do that, it will make a person watch a film, read a book, play a game, stop midway, and start thinking about the real world. That is the break of immersion. You don't want them to remember that they're engaging in a medium. You want them to be lost in that medium until you decide to give them a break. And yeah, I won't go into all the details about that because I think I'll go on. There's too much of a rabbit hole there. The last one I want to mention there is bad gameplay and broken mechanics. So generally speaking, if if there's bugs in your game, if it's similar to bad interface, but it's more to do with the actual gameplay itself. If there's bugs, if there's items that don't work, if there's power-ups that don't give you the stats that they were supposed to give, enemies that are more difficult than they're supposed to be, or you kill something that gets back up, if the game crashes, all of these things are things that are just going to break the game and the person might just leave and never come back. XCOM Chimera Squad, I was actually enjoying that, but it has some game-breaking bugs which literally make it unplayable. And if you encounter it, then that's it. That's like your whole save file is gone. Years later, they still haven't addressed that. So I just can't touch the game because you don't know when you're going to encounter it. I stopped playing for like a year and a half, and then I picked it up, and then it crashed. I was like, that's why I stopped playing. I remembered that was the reason I hadn't picked it up in a year, because it had a game-breaking bug on it. So keep things like that in mind. But also, I think things like item escalation, where items get too powerful, or enemies that become playable characters and they just become abysmally weak. These are things that can upset players. They're not necessarily bad gameplay, but they're kind of like irritating features. The one that comes to mind is Ida from Final Fantasy VIII. She's such a threat when you fight her, and then when you get her on your team, she just feels useless. You don't need her to be OP, but you do want her to be relevant. So yeah, with that in mind, the final step of a good user experience or good user journey is, do you deliver closure? You want to have a satisfying twist. You want your game to provoke thought and strong emotions with the conclusion. Strong emotions can be negative and positive, but if the person is still thinking about your product after it's done, then that's usually a good thing. Potential for expansion is not the same as a cliffhanger. So if every game or movie or medium should give closure when it ends. The player should feel satisfied that they have completed a journey. Potential for expansion is to say, and then something else can happen, which is different to you're in the middle of the story and then it just cuts off, and now you have to wait for the follow-up. So I would say things like the last Game of Thrones book, cliffhanger. It's really annoying. You want to know what happens next, and it's like mid-plot. A good example, actually, a more modern example, is probably in Across the Spider-Verse. A lot of people loved the film. I loved the film. But they complained that it didn't feel like a complete film. It felt like two films that had been cut in the middle, because it doesn't give you a satisfying ending to the second film. It gives you a cliffhanger, and you now must wait for the third film to complete the story. And you can't even properly judge the story because depending on how the third film goes, it will change your interpretation of events in the second one. The first film ended with the idea that he might go across the Spider-Verse. It was the potential for expansion, but it was a complete film in its own right. The second film ended on a cliffhanger. It didn't leave that satisfying conclusion. So keep in mind that when you're trying to create your player journey, make sure you get their attention, convert that into interest, let them know that this is something that they will want to play, get them playing it, maintain their engagement. Don't do those things that break engagement and make them like just want to stop playing or not want to come back. And then make sure that when they are done playing, you deliver that closure. That doesn't have to even be the end of the game. It can just be the end of a level. It can be the end of a chapter. It can be when you reach a checkpoint. There should be something that feels like gives a sense of completion, so the player feels like, yep, that was satisfying, and I'll come back and I'll play again later. Another key thing that you need to be aware of with establishing a strong premise is what are the selling points of your game. So generally speaking, you need to identify your core functionality. So for example, in Battle Drive, it's like driving, shooting, but you're also going to have like menu system, scoring system, level system, things that your game absolutely needs to function. Some of these things are universal across most games or most games of that genre. Some things might be unique to the game, but are still fundamental to it running. You should always have a unique selling point, something that makes your game different to every other game that is out there. Sometimes that might just be the story, or it might be a very specific gameplay mechanic. It might be a visual effect, but something that makes it unique. This is why I usually establish the difference between a unique selling point and a best selling point. The thing that makes it unique might not be the best thing about your game. The best thing about your game might be good graphics, or it might be really good gameplay. It might be you might have designed another shooter game or hero shooter or a MOBA which is similar to all of the others. What's unique is unique characters, but what makes it good is that it's just got good gameplay and good balancing. So identify your core functionality, your unique selling point, but then your best selling points. It is the job of the designer to establish this when making the premise. These points will then be used to prioritize tasks during development. They will also be used during the release process for the marketing. So it is very important that you understand what these are and establish them very early in your development process. I think we're approaching the end. You also want to have a clear definition of done. A good way to achieve this is through a vision board. If you are a designer and you are not a programmer and you're not an artist, generally speaking, the best way to do it is to get screenshots of images, find games, books, movies, songs that are similar to the idea that you have in your head that you want to complete and put them all together in one place. So you might say, I'll use Battle Drive as an example. We got inspiration from the movie Redline. That was the visual style that we wanted. The gameplay, we were thinking it should invoke something similar to the movie 2012. Music, we got urban, kind of like hip-hop style music. Not even hip-hop, but like just like urban, kind of hip-hop / garage style. We wanted to feel like a Street Racer game. Even though it's not a Street Racer game, we wanted it to have that vibe from an audio perspective. And there's other elements, and we bring that all together. I haven't put them here because your vision board is for you. It is not a marketable product because you're essentially just stealing from other people. But you're not stealing, you're using them as references. If I was to put these references on this screen, technically I would be like claiming it as my own. So that's why I've only put examples from products we've made. But when you're doing this for your own personal use, it is fine. Go on Google, grab whatever it is that you need to be clear about what it is you're trying to make. And you're taking a little bit of all of your different inspirations. You put that together and then you say, artist, can you make a game that looks like this? Programmer, can you make a game with these mechanics? And so on and so forth. Writer, can you make a game with a story like this? But you as the designer, it's your job to put that together and have a clear vision and then communicate that to the rest of your team. So definition of done is what does your product look like at the end? what is your personal definition of success. Other people will tell you what success is. You need to have your own vision of that. Um, so now, okay, this is the second to last bit now. Once you've established all of this, you then create your specifications. This is where you get your technical kind of stuff out of the way. What genre is your game? Fantasy, educational, horror, etc. What type of game is it? A shooter, mobile game? What is your interface? Is it top down? Is it third person? Is it first person? How does the player interact with the game? Do you play as a specific character? Is it like FIFA where you can control multiple characters? Is it like XCOM where you're the commander and then you're giving commands to your units? Or Halo where you're indirectly playing as Master Chief? Different games have different interfaces, so you need to establish what your one will look like. Players will always want to know what platform is it on: Xbox, PC, PlayStation, mobile, VR, etc. And similar to what I was saying before, know what the similar products are. Know if there's anyone out there that's done something similar to what you're doing. It is really useful to know this because I love to use this example. I always forget whether it was Dying Light or Mirror's Edge, but they created a free running game. So I believe it was Mirror's Edge created a free running game, which is first person. So it was the first of its kind that did this. And when people were playing the game, they were getting sick. Some were throwing up, some were getting nausea, some were just getting dizzy. They couldn't understand why it was happening at first, and they looked at games that had similar mechanics that did not have this problem. They found the only games that had similar mechanics were some shooting games like Call of Duty. Normally, you only like slide or grind on a obstacle, so it wasn't the same. But it was the closest that they could find, and what they realized is because the way the human eye works, when you're playing a shooter game, you have a reticule. You look at that reticule and it orientates you in that world, and you're able to balance yourself. Because in the real world, we see all around us. But in a game, we're looking at a fixed screen, and that fixed screen contradicts the rest of the world that we're looking at, and our eyes just get confused. So when you're first person and you're moving around, it happens in movies too, by the way. First person shots in movies can often make people feel ill, and there's a few ways to get around that. What they did is they added a reticule to Mirror's Edge. Even though there's no shooting, they added one, and then they made it really, really, really faint. So it's almost invisible. If you do not look for it, you're not going to see it. But your eye still uses it as a focal point and allows you to balance yourself and not get sick when you're playing the game. This was a solution they incorporated, and Dying Light, as a game that came out years later, used the same solution. If you know that a game has games that are similar to your own, you'll find that you're going to encounter problems that you may never have anticipated. Chances are somebody else has already solved it. So if you know similar products, you can also find similar solutions. It also helps when you're looking for your target audience and what they enjoy, what they've complained about. You get a lot from understanding the competition. So, sorry, I made this talk like twice as long as it usually is because I was making some changes and I just realized how long it is, but this is the final part. Once you've established all of those details, you basically summarize it into an elevator pitch. You need to have a description of your game. You need to know what your core features are, your unique selling point, your best selling point, what is the plot or the synopsis of your game. I use this template in order to address this. You are X trying to accomplish Y while avoiding Z in an interface of type N. Followed by the game genre, what makes the product different, what is your unique selling point alongside best selling point. Try and link your selling points to what makes the game fun. So the game can be challenging because of this feature. The game can be difficult because of that feature. The game can be entertaining because of this feature. So you're taking the things that make a game fun or things that make you want to play the game, and you're linking it to the selling points that you have. So if I try and make a live example, let's say Silent Symphony. In Silent Symphony, you are playing as Tago Nipstro, trying to master magic while avoiding the Shikigami, who are trying to destroy the world, in a third-person adventure game. What makes Silent Symphony unique is that as Tago, you can see the color of sound, which allows you to solve puzzles and figure out your enemy's weaknesses, or to figure out the challenges, the different obstacles that you need to overcome. Um, you can also do mini games and like play music and so on. I don't know. I'm tired, so I'm kind of I forgot what the other features of the game are. But let's say you can um, enjoy. You can be experience beautiful and outstanding scenery while being fully engaged in a deep story that covers multiple genres and goes across different cultures. Something along those lines. So kind of like manipulating the selling points are in the what makes it worthwhile. Um, but generally speaking, that would be your elevator pitch. Now, this is me just saying it from memory. I would normally write this down, which would allow me to figure it out a lot easier. Um, and it shouldn't take more than a minute to really get through all of that. 1 minute, 30 seconds tops. And then if once you've got the attention of the person you're speaking to, once you've got their interest and they are engaged, you can then decide whether or not to give them more details, or you can see if they have questions, then they want to know more about the product. But you need to just basically get your core details across as quickly as possible so that they know, is this something that they would be interested in. So yeah, just to summarize then, benefits to a strong premise. It's a guiding star. It's something that helps you stay on track, especially important for large projects or when you're working with multiple people. The more people you're working with, the more important it is that you have a single point to communicate with. It stops projects from losing shape over time. So scope creep and other distractions that can make a project basically, I like to use like the ship of Theseus as an example. Over time, you keep changing little bits and little bits, and eventually you end up with an entirely different product. You need to be careful to avoid that, and having a good premise which documents the key aspects of your game helps you do that. But also it means that if you do change a lot, as long as it still adheres to the premise, it's fine. And that's why I use the ship of Theseus as an example. In the ship of Theseus, every individual component of the ship was replaced, but piece by piece over time. Is that still the ship of Theseus if no part of the original ship remains? It still serves the same function, it still belongs to the same person, it still looks the same. It's just you've replaced all of the pieces. And I think having a good premise means understanding what the core identity of your product is, even if it changes over time. Battle Drive was originally going to be a game show type game, and we turned it into a kind of adventure survival game. The core identity and the core gameplay is still there, but the plot and the actual mechanics have changed significantly from the original concept. And it changed with reason and intent. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't scope creep, it was certain elements that we originally thought of just wouldn't work, so we changed them. It helps a lot with prioritization. Over the course of your project, you will have to change things. You will have to make sacrifices and compromises. So knowing what your priorities are, knowing what your core features are, knowing what your unique mechanics are, your best selling points, and saying these are the things that we can't get rid of. Everything else we can compromise and we can negotiate. So through that, it minimizes interruptions, and essentially it just saves time with reprioritization. It helps keep it consistent. The only risks really is it can encourage excessively rigid approach to development. Like I said with the whole ship of Theseus thing, you can change your product. You don't have to stick to things exactly. So when you have a clear premise and then someone says, hey, why don't we make it a 2-player game instead of a 4-player game? You're like, no, we said we'll make it 2-player, 4-player. Like, you can, if it actually makes the game better, go for it. Don't be too rigid when sticking to it. Just make sure you can justify every decision. So yeah, hopefully by now you have a solid understanding of what a premise is and what it's used for. You understand how to turn a vague idea into a clear goal, which you will later then break down into objectives during the planning phase. You'll know what steps you need to focus on in order to get started. So these are the different things that you need to do in order to get started on just building a game. I cannot stress enough the importance of a good premise for undergoing any project, regardless of its type. Even when I was talking to students about writing essays or doing a summative portfolio, I was like, always start with a solid premise. Make sure you have a clear idea of what it is you're trying to achieve before you get started. If you do not know what your target is, how do you plan to hit it. Um, Going through this process yourself, I would hope that you would walk away with a single page document or a task board that you can use as a guideline for your game, especially with the specifications vision board I mentioned before. So yeah, like a vision board to serve as a goal and a point of reference throughout development, and an elevator pitch that allows you to quickly and effectively describe your game. In my next video, we're going to talk about planning and creating smart targets. So I'm going to do the game planning essentials. I'll probably do this tomorrow, and then I'm going to take a break and focus on just general development after that. These talks, I've been editing them a little bit. This used to take 30 minutes, it now takes an hour. So it's a bit longer than it usually is. However, I'm still mostly just talking at you, and I'm not really giving you live examples. We do have face-to-face workshops. If you check out our Eventbrite, you can see the types of events that we do. Sometimes I do workshops online, so via Twitch. Other times you can come down to London or Yeovil, the two cities we're based in, and we go through the software development lifecycle. So we've got the premise, planning, develop, testing, and release phases, where we walk through the process and help people create their own products from scratch, or we use templates and the sample games to help them just learn and understand the principles behind game development. So this session focused on the premise. The next one will focus on planning, and then my next stream was going to, after that, will be focusing on development. Throughout August, we're going to be hosting a series of events, including, I believe, a game networking event on Friday the 8th, and the Intergaming event on Sunday the 17th, where we're going to be demoing our games to the public. So I will be talking about testing protocols, and like I said at the beginning of the stream, good testing is not just about making sure there's no bugs, it's about making sure that the premise that you established at the beginning, the goals that you set out to accomplish, did you actually achieve them? So we'll talk about like asking good questions, getting feedback from the audience, whether or not you have the right environment for solid testing, external testing versus internal, all of that stuff. But I'll talk on that like during the event and after the event. So that will be probably from like the 18th of August, give or take. And we'll talk about the release process as the final step towards the end of the month after the our development workshop on the 23rd of August. So yeah, there is a lot happening this month. I did a little video on that recently, just to kind of cover all the different things we've got going on over the next couple of weeks. So I would say if you follow our Instagram, you'll get regular updates on what's going on. Or generally, if you jump on the Eventbrite page, you'll see the actual events that we're hosting. Those are the main two sources where I do updates. But over the next couple of days, I'll be doing a lot of streaming on Twitch, just because I've kind of been leaving it in the dust recently with all of my admin work. So yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed this. If you want to see more videos like that, then like I said, have a look at our Eventbrite, or just like and subscribe on this page. I will be doing another video tomorrow and a couple more over the space of the next few days, up until around Thursday, and then we're going to be mixing things up a little bit. So we'll be jumping mostly over to the TikTok platform after that. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you've had fun, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. It's just coming up to 3 AM. I'm going to rest now and take a nap. So yeah, cheers. This is Apocalyptic signing out.